Wenatchee to the museum. In the Wenatchee, there's a big green wagon that would be pulled by a team of horses. It's the name of the wagon is Bain. That's B-A-I-N. That's the manufacturer. Anyway, he bought that wagon in Sprague, Washington, which is a little town in eastern Washington, down south of Spokane, and drove that wagon up to Spokane Falls and bought some supplies, and this is one of them. And we still have the invoice from this, that he bought all his things, like a demijohn, a big jug with vinegar to use for pickling food and so forth. And this was his hoe, and have his gloves too. Okay.
How much did that cost?
This cost
that hoe.
Less than $1.
Less than $1.
I think it's on there. I could have brought the invoice, but as a whole, less of stuff. In 1882 or 83, and then they went by team and wagon everywhere and went to Creston. Do you know where that is? Just a little town this side of Spokane.
But you can find it. We have Washington maps. So
yeah,
that's
Creston, C-R-E-S-T-O-N. There's some big elevators there. And just north of there was some good farmland, and he could see the timber over the Columbia River, and it looked like Norway to him, so he decided to stay there and homestead there. And but that winter he had an injury, a felon. That's like a stick, you know, from a pin, like a baby diaper pin. You get a stick and you get a big swelled up finger, that's a felon, and that's very sore. And then they didn't have antibiotics or medicine like we have now, so he suffered with that all winter. And in the spring, somebody came along and offered him $500 for his little farm there that he had started, and he had talked to the Army engineers that had been out surveying around this country, and they told him about all this wonderful grass country and the Big Bend, so he decided to come out here and take a look. And so hitched up his wagon and went on a big circuitous route up by Grand Coulee and back down over towards Chelan, and then that was where the military road ended, or went from Spokane Territory, I think, to Chelan Falls. You know where that is? You know where do you know where the BB Bridge is? That's, yeah, Chelan Falls is that little town. But he didn't go down there. He just came to the top and then turned this way and came because he could see all across this grass country and the timber on Badger Mountain. And he thought he would come over here and look. And mind that the whole country was just grass then. You know what CRP looks like, the fields that are just planted to grass now? You know, there's not being farmed. That's what the whole country looked like then, with brush and animals running around, deer and coyotes and things like that. And but not very many Indians. It wasn't very wild country then. But so he came here and found a place out south of by Badger Mountain at the mouth of Ruud Canyon. You know where that is. You've been out there. And so that's where he decided to establish his homestead. He could put a stake in the ground and measure out the ground that he wanted, 160 acres, and register that somehow. Probably had to go back to Spokane to do that because there was no land office here at that time. And so that became his homestead. So, and in order to get supplies, he had to take his team and wagon and go all the way back to Spokane. That's a long ways. It takes us 2.5 hours by car. It took him several days, you know, by team and wagon. And to get across the coulees out here was a very difficult task because when they had a load of, for example, the first crop that he sold was beans. And he took the beans out, they went to the brink of the coulee, unloaded the beans and layered them down over the edge of the cliff with a rope, and then took the wagon apart and put it down piece by piece. Then they had to lead the horses through some little rocky draw or something to get to the bottom. Then they hooked up the whole thing again, put the wagon all together, went across the bottom of the coulee, like you know where Jameson Lake is? Like that, you know what I mean by the coulee then. Got to the other side, took it all apart, led the horses up to the top, and then pulled everything up by rope, put the wagon together again, and went on to Spokane. When they got to Grand Coulee, I think it was some more of an open slope they could get across there in the Coulee City area, but Moses Coulee was tougher. If they didn't take a shortcut like he did, they would have to go clear up toward Mansfield to get across there. Okay, so the first in 1883, May 12th, I think, 1883 was the date he established his homestead. And one of the first things he did was get out his plow, which he had bought at Sprague, brought the plow with him, and some potatoes that he had bought there, and he plowed a furrow with his plow and his team of horses and planted potatoes. That was the first furrow supposedly plowed in Douglas County, and the first crop that was plowed here. That fall, some people who were exploring the territory came around and tried to buy his crop from him, but he couldn't sell them because he had to have them to live on for the winter for himself and to save enough so he would have seed for next year's crop, okay? So finally they cleared some land, and the first commercial crop they planted was beans. You know, like you buy beans at the store and make chili, and those pinto beans, brown beans, white beans, all kinds of those, you know, your mom uses those. And they would thrash them by hand. In the museum, here is a flail. Do you know what a flail is? It's a stick, bigger than this, and then there's a piece of leather, and then another short stick on the end. And they would use that flail, that short stick, they would beat the beans, they'd put them in a pile and then beat them with that seam. And that's the way they thrashed them, rather than with a combine like her husband does. To harvest wheat, they did it all by hand. And so what I'm about to say to you is that pioneering was, when we look back at it, it was kind of romantic, and we talk about the Indians and the cowboys and all that stuff, but really what it was about was hardship and hard work. And that's kind of demonstrated by this old hoe that he bought with him. And it probably was this big when he brought it. You know how they come from the store, about that square? And so he not only wore it out, he broke it, and then he had to weld it himself in a, you know, in an old forge. So that's his garden hoe. And